Live from Los Angeles, this is Rabbi Sherman and Rabbi on the Sidelines, where we speak about the intersection of sports and faith. This week, we are joined by an amazing guest, a photographer for Getty Images. She has photographed every major event in the world, from the World Cup to the Super Bowl, from the World Series to the NBA Finals to the Stanley Cup Finals, to the U.S. Open, which will be happening just in a couple of days. Fresh off of the Olympics in Tokyo, 28 days there, we are proud and so thrilled to welcome Elsa Garrison from Getty Images. Elsa, it's so great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Well, this is awesome to not just hear from you, but a little later I'll show some images and maybe you can walk us through how you either decide to get those images and really what we see, not during the play, but actually after the play. So we've spoken to a lot of broadcasters over this past year on Rabbi on the Sideline. We've spoken to athletes, coaches, but we really haven't spoken to the people that capture those images. So what drew you to, number one, photography, but actually sports photography in specific, as opposed to any other thing that you could capture in this world?
Well, I think when I started taking pictures, I was in high school, and my friends were all athletes and I was not. So it was a way for me to kind of share that experience with them. And what I loved about sport photography, especially early on when I started in, the 90s, it was all manual focus, manual exposure, everything. It was not an easy thing to do. And that's the part I loved about it. It was a challenge. I loved the challenge of focusing, capturing, peak action and storytelling moments. And it was a way for me to feel like I was still a part of what my high school friends were experiencing, and then flash forward, into a career. I've never was really a sport junkie. That's when someone asked me, it's like, oh, are you a fan? I'm like, no, I purely like it from the photography aspect of it. And, the technical end of kind of sport photography and how it's all problem solving. And, because every venue is different, every situation's different. And as a photographer, I need to kind of solve those problems and figure it out. So how am I going to make images that represent the history of this game? And that's what the biggest thing I love about my job.
So I love how you use the word storytelling. In my profession, I use words to tell, and here you use a camera. So number one, what is that difference, for instance, from the days where you had to develop the film as opposed to the time now where I guess you can look at the image digitally, delete, etc. Like, how has that changed? Is there more leeway? Is it a tighter window? What does that look like?
So when I first started, I actually traveled around with a darkroom kit, and I had a changing bag, and I'm sure I cooked a lot of film because it was, so I'd have like a Dev Tech, which was this device that kind of kept the water at a constant temperature. I used a hair dryer to dry my film, which is probably not a good thing to do, but all I needed was running water. I had a changing bag. I didn't need a light, tight room. And, I had a film scanner. So I'm carrying less side equipment, which allows me to carry more camera equipment, I guess. But the way the business has changed from doing film versus digital, I feel like now, when I first started, example would be a baseball game. So I'd shoot a 7:00 baseball game. Well, most newspaper deadlines were around 8:30, at least on the East. So you're trying to hit those East Coast newspaper deadlines. And so that would mean shooting one or two innings of the game, have to go process film, scan it, what you could, and then make it back out for like the fifth inning and then wrap up the game. Now I'm constantly uploading images, and it's, so for example, tomorrow night I have a Mets game here in New York. And so I will shoot the first half inning and at the very least get images of the pitcher out, because you never know if the pitcher's going to have a great game or have a bad game. And either way, someone's going to be writing about him and talking about him. Any scoring that happens or any big plays that happen, I get out at the end of that first half inning. And so every half inning, I'm, ingesting cards, I'm, tagging images, cropping images, captioning them. It's just a constant workflow. And so what used to be at a film game, if I sent, 15 images, that was great. Now, if I don't get 15 images out in the first couple of innings, then there's something wrong. So it went from, my entire game take of being 15 to 20 images on the wire post game versus now it's about 60.
That's amazing. I mean, even, you type in Dodgers Mets and all of a sudden during the game, you're seeing these images, which is, I mean, fun for us as fans, but I can't imagine the workload and pressure that you're dealing with on the other side within the well. You said that for instance, you do portraits in spring training, but you also do these game shots. What makes a good sports photograph, right? And since you're doing these game shots, how do you know, or at least try to anticipate what will be that moment of, I'll show you in a couple of seconds, but the umpire doing safe or that slide into home plate? How do you anticipate being there at the exact millisecond that you have to be?
So I think the more you cover a sport and the more you work a venue, the more you know its nuances and intricacies. And so obviously that helps me kind of anticipate or predict what a team's going to do. Because a lot of athletes kind of are creatures of habit, and baseball is definitely one of those sports where they're very methodical, kind of superstitious, a little bit. And, like pregame, you can see some guys like, okay, no one touches, a player's bat. Like, there's all these superstition things that people follow. So, the more you work something, the more that you will understand it as a sport and kind of what the athletes will do. And so you just keep that in the back of your mind. I like to call, when I cover something, you're kind of like a manager, your game management.
Mm-hmm.
So, you decide, okay, I'm going to bring this set of lenses with me. I'm going to start shooting from here. And some venues you can move around, some places you cannot. So that's, you have to decide, okay, if I can't move around, how am I going to capture all these things that I'm going to need to capture during the game? And so for example, a baseball game, I shoot both starting pitchers. I often shoot action pictures of any of the other pitchers that come in the game. Obviously, follow the storylines. I'm checking Twitter throughout the game to see if there are things that are happening behind the scenes that I might not know about. I have the game cast on in the back of the room. I have like the MLB stat cast thing up as I'm going, just to see if there are any milestones. I often read game notes for each sport before I start shooting, just to see if there are any, milestones or records that are going to be broken at a particular game. So at least I'm aware of all that stuff in the background, and I can react accordingly when the opportunity presents itself.
Well, it sounds like a sports junkie to me.
Yeah.
But at least doing the work, it's not just actually capturing that moment. And then any secrets, by the way, in the LA venues in terms of photography, whether it's Staples or Dodger Stadium, that the things that we don't see that you see when you're down there?
The thing that I love about Staples is it's definitely very Hollywood, because it's all very theater lit. Like of all the NBA arenas that I've covered and hockey arenas like that, Staples has some of the best, available around. So everything looks great whenever you shoot from there, versus some arenas that might not be as well lit. But I think what's great is, fans are slowly coming back into the play, and that really adds to the atmosphere, and the players feed off of it. We all feed off of it. And so that helps your pictures. For me as a photographer, I'm looking for ways to tell the story of the game, whether it's through peak action or reaction. And what I'm looking for when I'm shooting is, do I want a scene setting picture where I'm shooting something maybe a little bit wider so you can kind of see the environment? Or am I focusing really tightly on the action of what those players are doing, looking at the shapes of their body? Like, are they making something sort of interesting and creative that is going to catch someone's eye and lead them into maybe reading more about what happened on that game? Or a reaction picture, a celebration, dejection, all those things, can relate the casual viewer to oh, okay, there's a human element here. And, this person is really celebrating a great athletic feat, or is really just devastated after training for all this time and to come short in the end. So those are the kind of the story telling pictures I'm looking for. I think today what has changed in about the way that photography is consumed, it's there's just never enough. I feel like there's so many different ways that you can consume things, whether it's on social media with Twitter and Instagram, or if it's in image galleries on sports sites. You can never shoot too much, I feel like. But when I'm thinking about where images are going to play, I think if it's going to be on a mobile device, I like to shoot a little bit tighter, so then more of the person's kind of face fills the frame, so you can really feel that impact and feel like you're really there with them in that moment, whether they're going up for a dunk or whether they've hit a home run or a grand slam, any of that. So that's, as a photographer, as a visual journalist, that's how I'm approaching how I cover things.
So 2 days ago was 8/24 in LA. It was actually Kobe Day. Any special Kobe moments that you had captured over your time as a photographer?
So when I first started, I was living in Los Angeles, and I began my career at Getty Images. It was actually All Sport, was a photo agency that was acquired by Getty a few years later, but my time is counted with them. Kobe Bryant had just started his Lakers career, and it was amazing to see how he developed as a player over the years. And I guess the one picture that always registers in my mind, it was from his last NBA All-Star game, and it was in Toronto. And if anyone who knows Kobe and his relationship with his daughter Gigi, and that she loves basketball, that she is always out there pregame with him during warm-ups. And so I shot this picture of them together that, after they both died, kind of got a lot of use again. But it was a really lovely moment of them just, he hugging his daughter, and just you could see how much they loved each other, and it was really beautiful.
I actually think I have that right here, so just give us one moment. Let's see here. Sorry.
Oh, all good.
Let's check that. Can you see that right there?
Yep, there it is.
Yeah, so that was at the All-Star game, correct?
Yep, that was in Toronto. That was his last All-Star game, and so
wow.
Yeah, it was really cool. So I just always really admired their relationship, and or how close he was with his daughter. And it would have been really interesting to see, how she could have changed the game of women's basketball. I mean, it's, I think it's definitely sad, obviously, that they passed. Sure. But I remember during NBA finals that I've covered with them, when she was just a little tiny little kid, like she was always holding her, when they were up on the podium getting the trophies. And
so take us through actually some of these people. So the Williams sisters, the U.S. Open will not have them for the first time, I believe, since 2003. I don't know if you remember that moment, or what you were capturing and what story that tells.
So, when Serena is always, Serena's great. I love her athleticism, her grit, and she just, she sometimes can be her own worst enemy, I think, but she always plays really well at the U.S. Open, or, the U.S. Open is, I think, one of her favorite tournaments, and New York loves her. And I think sometimes Serena will get behind on the set, and she finds a way. And when she starts digging herself out and winning those points, she really celebrates, and she really lets it out. And that's what, as a photographer, I love that, because, great reaction moments are my favorite things to shoot. And I just feel like you have more of a connection than with an average, action shot. So I'm always looking for her. Even after she wins a point, I always stay on her to react. Or if she loses a point, she's always going to give me something that will illustrate a different side of the game, other than just serves, backhands, forehands.
Well, I love what you said in an interview recently that I read about, it's not about the action, it's about the reaction. And for me, as a rabbi, that's actually what faith is about, right? It's not necessarily about the moment, but actually it's about what happens next and how you react to that moment that happened. So like, I love when I read that, you're like, I don't care about the final shot. I mean, obviously we do, right?
Yeah.
But like, what is that moment when the player's in tears on the bench, or when the person's hoisting the trophy because they hit that game winner? I absolutely love that.
I feel like that's how you can make that connection with someone. It's like, it's one thing to look at a great action picture and say, oh, wow, that's a wonderful athletic feat. But you don't have, as a human being, a connection to how they're feeling at that moment until after that moment, when you see how they react to it. And then you're like, you can say, oh, I can feel that with them.
So you spent 28 days in Tokyo. You spoke about fans, and obviously Tokyo had no fans. What was the Olympic experience there, and how did it compare to the Olympics that you've covered before, whether in Rio, winter, summer? Like, I mean, it happened. It was successful, but what was it like?
It was definitely different, and it was a lot more restrictive, obviously. And so there weren't a lot of movement as far as us as photographers. We were kind of assigned to a certain venue for a good period of time. It wasn't like past Olympics where I could cover a wide variety of sports. So this one, I started off with fencing, and I was on fencing for the first 9 days. And so it was a little like Groundhog's Day. It's like, okay, get up in the morning, take the bus,
And like, what's your knowledge of fencing before the Olympics?
None, actually. I didn't really have a lot of knowledge of fencing. So I did actually do kind of a feature picture story on a British fencer named Marcus Mepstead. He actually trained here in Brooklyn, and he was the only member of the GB team. Like, they didn't have a Great Britain, didn't have a fencing team. So he got the funding himself and, used Team GB to get to the Olympics. And so I followed him during his training, and it was amazing to me how hard those athletes train, and you wouldn't even know, you wouldn't even think about it. And I mean, he's working out like 6-7 hours a day, and he has like a technical skills. He was doing endurance training, all these different things, and just to kind of see it all come together was really interesting. But he explained a lot the different disciplines to me a little bit, and so I had a little bit of an idea going in what I was getting into. But after about 2 or 3 days of shooting, it's like, okay, I know what's going on now. If you're there for 12 hours a day, you figure it out pretty quickly. So
did you get to catch the Israeli baseball team at all by any chance?
No, I didn't get to go to baseball. I was so bummed about that, because baseball is my favorite. But I think the way this Olympics was, there were a lot of venues that were really spread out. So the football was really far away. The baseball was really far away. And so it was kind of, the photographers who covered those were based more out in that region versus where I was kind of closer to the press center. So I was closer to a lot of all those other in-town events. So I did some beach volleyball as well, because I was just really close. And what was interesting is, so they would pipe in music at the beach volleyball. So they hired a DJ from Los Angeles, actually. And I can't remember his name. I wish I had written it down, but he was very, very good. To kind of give that sort of atmosphere and vibe. And it really actually helped. But the fencing, they play music sometimes, like during the intros when they come out. But then once the fencing started, it was so quiet in there. And it felt like you were shooting practice, but then it really, it all meant something. And towards the latter part of the day, they'd have medal matches every night. And so then their teammates who either didn't make it or their other coaches, like they were sitting in the stands. So then there was some kind of noise factor, some cheering and going on, but it wasn't nearly what it would have been had it been a packed stadium. And it was, I noticed it too. I shot one U.S. women's football match, and there was nobody in the stands, and it was just, it was weird. And so they'd play music, and that kind of helped, but it was just, it was a very sterile environment.
So take us through this picture. I believe that's Simone Biles, right?
Yep, that was from Rio.
Exactly, not this year, but when I just saw this, I was like, wow. Did you cover gymnastics this time? And if not, what's your take on Simone Biles from before, and what happened this year during the Olympics?
So I did actually one round of gymnastics when she performed on the beam. Yeah, but that was the only gymnastics I had this time. And I think actually when in Rio too, that was the only gymnastics I shot was when she medaled in the beam. I think I did a little research on the twisties, and it's a real thing. And you can't predict when it's going to come. And if you lose that equilibrium, I mean, you looked at all the different and difficult things that she did in her floor routine and her beam routine. If you don't have that equilibrium and you can't finish that move, you could seriously injure yourself. And so I think, while I'm really sad that she, wasn't able to compete in the way that she wanted to, I'm glad that she was able to at least kind of finish out on the beam. But, she, to me, has really nothing to prove to anybody. I mean, she's played through injury. She's played through all these different things, or competed all through different things. And during her qualifications and all the events leading up to Tokyo, she more than proved that she is a talented gymnast. And I think, winning a medal for her, I'm sure was great. But she's already one of the most decorated gymnasts. So I think she's more than proven herself. But I'm glad that she didn't try and power through something that she seriously could have hurt herself. Like if, just taking a wrong fall. I mean, just, not having your bearings about you when you're in the mid of those technical moves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about historical moments for a second. One of them that I love that I didn't realize was you until I did some research was Steve Bartman in Chicago Cubs. You're there. The guy puts his hand out. Walk us through that and how that became really a moment of history for Chicago Cubs history. And thankfully they won the World Series a little later.
Yeah. So that was 2003. It was the NLCS against the Marlins. And there was always this thing like you hear like the curse of the Billy Goat and, like the how they were cursed and how and all these different things that both the Cubs and the Red Sox had done prior to winning their, drying up their World Series droughts. I just remember seeing at Fenway Park, like, priests with like holy water coming by and like, then they'd like, they'd bring the goat or the Billy Goat to Wrigley before every season starts to try and like, get rid of all that, bad.
We got some blessings here for the Clippers, so we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. But so it was during playoff games. I'm often one of like 2 or 3 other photographers. So we had 2 photographers on the field, and it was my turn to be up in the stand. So I was actually shooting in one of these kind of broadcast television baskets that they had a couple of television cameras, and then a few of us still photographers there. And so for me, I'm always, especially when you're in that position upstairs, I feel like as a photographer, my job is to really work on defense. And so, when you're working in that sort of environment with other photographers, typically the photographer that shoots from the first base side is focused on offense. And, as is the third, both the field of photographers are typically focused on offense. And so I feel like the elevated photographer focuses on defense. And
I'm usually focused on my popcorn, but good.
There you go. Yeah. So for me, when I'm shooting, especially baseball, the more you shoot, the more you kind of know where, if a batter's a puller or if they pull this way or that way or where they typically, hit. So you can kind of get your defensive shots that way, knowing in the back of your head, it's like, okay, he's probably going to ground out to short. So as soon as he hits it, I'm going to go to short, whatever. So when a pop fly happens, I follow it all the time. And most of the time it's just like can of corn, they catch it, whatever. That's, but sometimes collisions happen. Sometimes, it goes into the stands. And so you just never know. So I always follow it, and it actually produced something then. And it didn't occur to me that it was a thing until after the game, once, everyone identified that poor man and, his life in Chicago changed forever. But what I find interesting is that no one really talks about the errors committed afterwards that caused the runs, not necessarily the foul ball that, would have only been like the second out of that inning. But
wow.
But yeah, so I think it's important to that's how you show every aspect of the game. You follow the ball, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. So in this case, it did. And I think for me, what I took away from that moment as a photographer is when I had first started at All Sport Getty Images, they were still very much a boutique sport photo agency. And so clients would, like newspapers, magazines, websites, would go to them for a little bit of a different picture. And they really hadn't built up their wire service until early 2000s. And so what my style of photography did was kind of help usher in that kind of wire service side of Getty Images. And it's moments like that are important to get as a news photographer.
So you're a trailblazer in this industry. There's a small little YouTube about you on Woman of Influence, and just want to share a moment about gender and photography, which I think is important to share with us.
Environment pretty accommodating to a female. At first, I didn't really give it a lot of thought, and then I kind of was looking around. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm the only one on this sideline that's not a cheerleader, and I knew that going into it that I was going to have a different set of rules that I had to follow just because of being a woman, and that's all professional women know that that in going into a work environment that, especially one that's male dominated, you have to play by their rules. And then after, a couple of months, I found myself, kind of turning into a dude, like the way I talked, like the way I dressed. I didn't want attention drawn to me because I was a woman. I wanted attention drawn to me because I was a good photographer and I had a solid work ethic. And so I tried very hard to bring that forward.
Well, what's remarkable.
Has that changed? Is that true today? Are there other young people who you've impacted who now sit next to you saying, because of what you did, this is what I can do now?
I don't know if they directly have said that, but I guess maybe indirectly. But I guess so. Yeah. I think, I see more women photographers now than I've ever seen before. There are more women team photographers, whether it's NFL or baseball or hockey, than when I started 25 years ago. So that is definitely a positive change. I think the environment has changed a lot. So where, I don't feel so alone, I guess, as far as now I work in a lot of bigger markets, so it's different. There are a lot more women that work in bigger markets, but now when I travel to smaller markets, I see more women photographers, and I think that is a sign of real change because, it's one thing to work in a big city with a big, big pond of photographers, but to go to a small market and know that there are women that are successful and thriving is really wonderful.
So how did you make that jump, actually? Did somebody say, wow, this Elsa Garrison is just an unbelievable photographer? Was it sort of a gradual slope? I know the first thing you did actually was the Chargers out here in San Diego, now the LA and SoFi Stadium. Like, what is that barrier between like small market versus big market?
So for me, when I graduated college, so I did a couple of internships, and one of my internships before I graduated was with a sport magazine that doesn't really exist anymore called The Sporting News, and they were based in St. Louis at the time, but they used to be a baseball publication, and then they started to expand into other sports like hockey and NFL and college football. And so when I was an intern, they were really expanding their coverage. And so they traveled me as an intern. And that was where I got my first taste of being a traveling sport photographer. And I met a lot of other photographers from other agencies and magazines. And I met some of the editors, and they took me to the Super Bowl that year. And it was Dallas versus the Steelers in Phoenix. And so that's where I met a lot of the editors that would eventually hire me at All Sport. And so I met them at the Super Bowl, and then I reached out and said, I'm not sure if you have any openings, and they said, send us your portfolio. And then I had an interview, and next thing you know, I'm moving to LA. And so that's how it started for me. But I think it's making those connections, whether it's at events or whether it's at conferences or workshops. You need to make that connection with somebody that's in a position to hire you. And make that impression. And when you have that opportunity to make that impression count. And so will you
be at the Super Bowl this year at SoFi?
No, actually, I'm moving to Beijing. So if I were going to the Winter Olympics, I would probably be at the Super Bowl in SoFi. But
it's a tough choice.
Yeah. So it's in the last couple of years, like the Olympics and the Super Bowl, they didn't quite overlap. Like you could in theory do both, but they don't like to have you do that. This time, I think opening ceremonies happen the day before the Super Bowl or the day of the Super Bowl, something like that. So there's no way to do both.
So I want to ask you one last question, actually 1.5 last questions. But first, a big shout out to Steve Freeman, an old friend of mine and our family, and made this connection here. Steve's an amazing photographer. Oh, I should have brought the pictures I have from Billy Owens he gave me when I was like 6th grader. So really awesome. Amazing photographer. This is a wonderful photograph, one of my favorite baseball players. Give me 1 second here, and we'll love the story behind this. Give me 1 second. There we go. Mariano Rivera walking out into Yankee Stadium. I don't know if that was his last call or not. I think it says thank you something.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it says
thank you, Mariano, up there. Exactly. And I love the black and white image. Just take us through capturing this moment.
So during his last season, there were a lot of towards the end of the season, we knew that the Yankees were going to make the playoffs. And so every game that Mariano pitched, we're like, is this going to be his last one? Is this going to be his last one? And so they had kind of what they called Mariano Rivera Day at Yankee Stadium towards the end of, September and of his final season. And so if anyone who knows about Yankees or Mariano Rivera, that his walkout song was Enter Sandman. And so they had Metallica playing in the outfield, and there were a few of us that were allowed to stand right by the bullpen door. And so he made his entrance.
Wow.
And there's this picture of all the kind of photographers clustered together. And I think my friend Kathy from AP was right next to me. And then you can see the Yankees photographers and all the videographers. And what is fascinating to me is like we all shot it differently. And I was the only one that really went wide with it. And I just thought that what I wanted to show was like his view of coming out of his office. Basically, the bullpen is his office. Nice. He's coming out to work, like, so what I thought would be really fascinating was to, show that atmosphere, like that. This is one of those times where I felt like you needed to show Yankee Stadium. And it was great. It was a packed house, and it was perfect. And he is such if you've ever met him, worked with him, talked with him, he's such a quiet kind of guy. And, like, and just the way that he just kind of waves to acknowledge the fans, like he's got his head down, it was classic him. And so I knew that after I had shot that, I was like, okay, I think I got something here.
Yeah. Actually, he was on the team with the Columbus Clippers in AAA when I was in high school, with him, Derek Jeter, Jorge Posada. And you get into those games in the Syracuse MacArthur Stadium, it was called, for like $3 sitting in the front row behind the dugout. That's
amazing.
Yeah, we knew they were on their way. So for sure.
Yeah. That's a good lineup.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It was amazing. So
we used to joke that whenever Mariano would like celebrate the last out of a game, it'd be like, like he never really gave it up. Even like a World Series, he was kind of like, it was pretty subdued compared to other closing pitchers, but
for sure. And I know he actually is a man of faith. This is the question of this podcast. Is there faith in your work? And I don't mean by, on the field, absolutely. People cross themselves and, thank God after the game and before the game and everything like that. But I'm talking about the element of faith in yourself, belief in yourself that you're going to capture moments that needed to be captured for literally for history.
Yes, actually there is. I feel like now I have that faith and confidence that I know that I'm going to come away with something. And for me, there's always this thing as a still photographer is that, you don't really think about the pictures that you've gotten. You think about the ones you've missed. And the way that I think about it is like, okay, if I missed it, then it wasn't meant for me to have. And so,
love that.
That's how I approach it. There are some photographers that really beat themselves up for like, well, why didn't I go over to third, or why didn't I shoot this? And for me, I think about it's like, if I were meant to have that picture, then I would have been in the right spot to get it. So then that's how I let that go and think, okay, but I have all these other things that I have gotten. So that was what I was supposed to get. So that was what I was meant to do.
So last question, predictions for the baseball season. Who's going to get on top, and maybe US Open? Any predictions there?
It'll be interesting to see how Novak Djokovic does if he, gets his, now that doesn't have a Rafa, doesn't have Federer to go through. He doesn't have a lot of the competitors that he needs to go through, whether he'll capture another US Open win. It'll be interesting to see on the women's side who comes up on top, if Naomi is able to capture another US Open win, or if it's going to be somebody else. I mean, we had, Ash Barty won Wimbledon, so we'll see how the women's side goes. As far as baseball, I think the Giants in San Francisco are playing really well. Selfishly, I would like the Yankees to do well because I live here in New York now, and so then it'd be an easy commute to baseball. Like it'd be easy, easy work. But I think there are a lot of really interesting scenarios on baseball. The Reds are playing really well, which who would have thought about that? Or Milwaukee or Atlanta. What was interesting, I saw that the Orioles finally got a win.
Yeah,
so they lost
against the Angels. I know.
I was kind of sad about that.
It was a magical Disneyland thing.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating. Like the Ohtani story is really interesting. Yeah. I mean, like it's almost someone had equated to like he's like a little league player because he pitches, then he bats, like he does all these things. And I hope that he does well. It's good for the game of baseball. So I think if I had to guess today, I mean, I'm trying to think who's really. if it ended today, if you looked at the records, I would guess maybe Tampa versus San Francisco would be an interesting kind of like, they're both playing pretty well. The Yankees are making a run. I think they're playing really well. I think the baseball purist might find an Astros-Dodgers World Series revenge game interesting.
Yes, after a 16-inning game last night, we'll see if they got any energy left.
Yeah. Oh man, that was amazing. I've been at some of those long games, but like after even with the new rules of putting, which I don't really know how I feel about that, to be honest. As someone who's somewhat of a baseball purist, I'm like, okay, I don't like the 7-inning doubleheader, and I don't like that they put a person on second base for extra innings. But
see what happens.
But yeah. I don't know. What are your predictions for the World Series? What would you?
Well, I'm a LA Rabbi, so we're talking the Dodgers here. But the
Dodgers Yankees could be fun.
That would be amazing, and we can have you in our community in person. And did you shoot the Lakers championship during the pandemic?
No, I did not. I was actually at hockey. I was in Toronto doing hockey for that, and then that was fun.
I love what you said in terms of storytelling. You often don't think of a photographer as a storyteller, and I love that and also the moment, capturing the moment after. I mean, to me, those are the moments that us, as we are about to celebrate our high holidays in our Jewish tradition, often people, we call our high holy days the Super Bowl or the World Series, but I don't think people often point to the fact that it's not about that moment. It's actually about what you do when you walk out of the synagogue, when you walk out of the stadium. What picture, and I might quote you during my sermons this year, what picture do you want to share with the world when you walk out of your spiritual sacred home? So Elsa, I want to thank you. We hope that you will follow Elsa Garrison. You can follow her on social media. You can also, I love seeing those bylines. It just says Elsa, right? That's what I saw. Yeah, so Getty Images, if you see Elsa, you've heard it here, right on Rabbi on the Sidelines. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you to LA shortly. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye, everyone.